Members, it's the appointed time and we have a quorum. Agenda item 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. The Legislative Council issued LC paper number CB-3938/2024-01. The Secretariat has issued this information paper. Please take note of this. Let us welcome the government representatives to join us. Agenda item 2, proposed installation of camera systems in all taxi compartments. We have with us Ms. Mabel Chen, Secretary for Transport and Logistics, and her team. Members, if you'd like to pose questions on this item, please press the Request to Speak button. Ms. Mabel Chen has a PowerPoint presentation. Please walk us through the paper. I'll say a few words and then I'll invite my colleagues to give the presentation. I know that a lot of members are attending this item today. The government understands that the public would like to see better taxi service quality. Because of this, we are rolling out 2 measures. That is to require all taxi owners to install camera systems in the taxi compartments. This includes the in-vehicle camera, dash camera, and the GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite Systems. They are known as the camera system. Also, we will require all taxi drivers to provide e-payment options. We noticed that after we've issued this government paper, members of the public respond positively to these proposals. In Shenzhen and Macau, for example, as well as in further countries like Australia and Vancouver, they require taxi drivers to provide e-payment options. E-payment options provided by taxi drivers is quite common, so we have to roll out the same measure in Hong Kong. We think that this is the opportune time for us to roll out these measures. Last year, we launched a series of measures to reform the taxi trade. One of the major points was to introduce the taxi fleet regime. Taxi fleets have to meet different licensing requirements. This includes installing a camera system that meets the requirement in the taxi compartments and providing e-payment options. All these taxi fleets are now preparing for these works, and in the coming 6 months, they will commence operation. By the time they get onto the road, they will have all the above-mentioned systems installed. They will play a leading and exemplary role in the trade, and we are now trying to extend these requirements to all taxis in Hong Kong to comprehensively enhance the service quality as well as the image of the taxi trade. We are proposing a win-win situation for passengers, taxi drivers, as well as the entire taxi trade. We will be able to enable all passengers to have a better traveling experience with these systems. We will also be able to increase the deterrent effect for the black sheep in the trade. This will be easier for the enforcement authorities to follow up on non-compliant practices. For example, refusing to accept a hire and overcharging, as well as detouring. This will better protect the interests of passengers. Also, e-payments are now becoming more common. E-payment means will allow passengers, in particular tourists, to pay for the fares more conveniently. They won't have to go to a bank or an ATM to withdraw cash before taking a taxi, because this is not very convenient for both the drivers and the passengers. A camera system will also be able to protect law-abiding taxi drivers. They won't have to worry about having disputes with passengers because of, for example, language barriers. I've heard taxi drivers say that they all want to do well, but they are worried about risks. They don't want to get into trouble. And the video recordings from the dash cameras will also help with the settlement of claims as well as the delineation of liabilities. The system will help improve drivers' driving attitude and behaviors. This will also help reduce the taxi insurance premiums and reduce the operating costs of the trade. Overall speaking, the installation of camera systems as well as the provision of e-payment means can both enhance the service quality of the taxi trade. This will also encourage more tourists to take taxis. This will not only increase the revenue for the trade and improve the future of the taxi trade, it will also help enhance our image as a hospitality city. The government attaches importance to the protection of personal privacy. Some taxi drivers have already installed cameras on their own in the taxi compartments. Under our proposal, the government suggests setting up a centralized platform to consolidate all the video and audio recordings. It is only when there are passenger complaints or when illegal acts are involved that we will authorize the relevant parties to retrieve the relevant recordings. The relevant recordings will be encrypted to ensure that they won't be stolen improperly. It is only through these means that we can protect the privacy of taxi drivers and passengers. We are happy to listen to members' views and take any questions from members. We are proposing an overall or general policy direction today in relation to the technical details as well as the education for the public. These are what we're going to work on. So after this panel meeting today, my colleagues, especially those from the Transport Department, will proactively educate the public about this so that we can nurture a culture on this and that people can be aware of our proposals as early as possible. This will facilitate our legislative amendment exercise. Now I will invite the Commissioner for Transport, Ms. Angela Lee, to brief us on the proposal through the PowerPoint presentation. I'll briefly walk members through the two sets of proposals. The first one concerns the camera systems. As mentioned, we have strong reference from other places. We've also looked at the situation of the taxi trade. We are proposing to require all taxi drivers to install camera systems, including an in-vehicle camera, a dash camera, as well as a GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System, in the taxi compartments. When there are disputes between taxi drivers and passengers, the relevant video and audio recordings can serve as corroborative evidence to facilitate the follow-up actions on complaints or investigation on the alleged illegal acts, such as refusing to accept a hire and overcharging. The video recordings from the dash camera can also serve as evidence to delineate the liabilities for the accidents, and this will also help insurance companies to settle the claims. The recordings can also help improve drivers' driving behaviors. In the long run, this can help reduce taxi insurance premiums. The GNSS can provide data on the locations of the vehicles. When there are disputes relating to driving route or driving safety, the recordings or data can help with the investigations. The government will engage a contractor to set up a centralized platform to consolidate the audio and video recordings collected on the three types of devices mentioned. To encourage the use of technology, we will not mandate taxi drivers to use the same model for these devices. However, the TD will come up with a set of specifications, and suppliers may apply to the TD for approval of the devices that can meet the specification requirements. Taxi drivers can, based on their own needs, get the approved devices. After the installation, the TD will carry out examination to ensure that the devices run normally and to ensure that the data collected will not be damaged. All the recordings and data collected will have to be encrypted and saved in the storage device for not less than 30 days. If there are no particular situations, the data will be deleted automatically. This will operate on a cloud system of the government, and risk assessment will be conducted to ensure that we can protect the privacy of passengers and drivers. It is only when necessary, for example, when there is a need to investigate the behavior of a driver, that the data collected will be uploaded to the centralized platform and stored on the cloud system. The audio and video recordings will be retrieved through a strong password as well as multi-factor authentication by an authorized person. The authorized person can then trace whether there is anyone trying to steal the information. Will allow taxi drivers to retrieve the video recordings of road conditions to handle matters in relation to insurance claims. On the e-payment proposal, the government has been encouraging taxi drivers to provide e-payment means. E-payment has become more common nowadays. However, most of the taxi drivers nowadays only accept cash. We propose to require taxi drivers to at least provide two types of e-payment means, including QR code and non-QR code payment means. There are many e-payment options available in the market. We also notice that different e-payment platforms are willing to offer concessions to taxi drivers to waive the handling charges. We believe that with the competition in the market, the relevant fees will be maintained at a reasonable level. The administration is willing to educate taxi drivers to collect fair payments through these e-payment platforms or e-payment means. As mentioned, our proposals will ensure a win-win situation. This will enhance service quality and provide a safe, comfortable, and convenient experience for passengers. This will also help protect law-abiding drivers in cases where there are disputes between drivers and passengers. This will also benefit the taxi trade because there might be room for reduction in taxi insurance premiums. This will also enhance the image of the taxi trade and encourage more people to take taxis, and this will generate more income for the trade. We're going to conduct the legislative amendment exercise. We seek to introduce the legislative amendments to the Legislative Council in Q2 next year. On the camera system proposals, we will start accepting approval applications in relation to the camera systems by the middle of next year. From the end of 2025 to the middle of 2026, the taxi trade will start installing the camera system. And by 2026, we'll be able to enact the legislation. On the e-payment proposals, our plan is to implement the proposal by the end of 2025, since there are already different e-payment options available. we will explain the proposals to the trade so that they will be prepared for the new measures. Thank you.
We welcome questions, comments from members. And we're going to consult the Transport Advisory Committee in due course on our proposal. We will also be tabling a bill into the Legislative Council. Let me read out the names of members. They'll be speaking in this order. I'll give each member 3 minutes since we have a very good attendance today. After Chan Hock Fong has spoken, I am going to draw a line. If you want to speak, please press the button as quickly as possible. We start with Chan Hock Fong, Gary Zhang, Stanley Lee, Luk Chung Hong, Yan Wing Kit, Lau Kwok Fan, Yim Kong, Chen Siu Hong, Chao Siu Chung, Frankie Yik, Michael Tien, Dominic Lee, Chan Pui Leung, Lo Wai Kwok, and Lau Meng Kwong. So, Mr. Chan Hock Fong will kick off, please. Thank you. Well, this proposal has arrived rather late. Well, it is the public's and the trade's aspiration for cameras to be installed. In fact, I've been talking to the trade. They are in support of the proposal. They think it should be implemented as early as possible. Now, I have some questions. According to the administration, they would like to promote market competition in order to drive down prices, and that means they will be accepting applications from different suppliers. However, there are specifications to be set, and how do you make sure that different service providers will be able to meet your requirements and that you won't run into problems only when something goes wrong? So how do you make sure that all the systems installed are of the same standard which could meet your requirement? Well, looking at the timetable, I think that we could speed things up. For example, the government could provide some form of incentive. Let's say subsidies. How about subsidies? Now, depending on the number of taxis in the trade, if you provide $1,000 subsidy for each taxi, we're talking about $10 million at most. This can help the smooth running of the scheme. Now, what happens if there is a system fault? Does it mean that the taxi driver won't be able to ply the trade for the day? So I think at the next stage, you will have to deal with these issues. Coming back to my point of view, well, I think that for drivers in general, they're in support of the proposal. Only those unscrupulous, law-breaking ones would oppose to this proposal. Well, I'll try to give a very brief response since we have a lot of members waiting to speak today. We're going to require the installation of 3 devices. As the member has pointed out, in Annex 2, we've set out the proposed major specifications of the centralized platform. Now, there is interfacing requirement between the platform and the various devices, and the details will be spelled out in due course. About compressing the timetable, I don't think this can be achieved through a financial incentive. Apparently, this proposal helps not only the taxi drivers but the trade in general, and I think it is an opportune time for us to take this forward. We need to, however, address the taxi trade's concerns. And after all, the responsibility falls on the shoulder of taxi owners and taxi drivers. This is the spirit we uphold. Now, the third point is about system faults. What happens if the system breaks down? I know that in neighboring places, say in Shenzhen and Macau, they have accumulated a lot of experience in camera systems in taxis. When the engine starts, the systems will automatically start as well according to the system design, and will definitely address members' concerns by talking to the service providers. Mr. Gary Zhang, I fully support this proposal. I think the Secretary already explained quite clearly the principles behind. After the implementation of the taxi driver offense point system on the 22nd of September, can you tell us more about the current situation, about the complaints from passengers and the number of prosecutions that can be initiated? Now, as the Secretary mentioned, with the introduction of a centralized platform, passengers' privacy can be better safeguarded. Does it mean that after mandating the installation of the camera systems in your proposal, taxi drivers will not be allowed to install their own in-car cameras? Now, about retrieval of video recordings, according to your design, only authorized persons will have access to the video recordings. What about police officers who may need the evidence of the video recording from one vehicle in order to prosecute the traffic accident of other vehicles? We have 18,000 taxis in the trade. I'm all right with having taxi owners shoulder the cost of procurement. But will the government be able to step in and help negotiate a better deal for taxi drivers? Because after all, this is about public service. They are procuring the devices to serve the public, and it's a significant cost. Now, about the introduction of the taxi driver offense point system, as at the end of November, 21 taxi drivers have had their points deducted or have accumulated offense points. 10 of them have accumulated 10 offense points, and also another 10 drivers have accumulated 5 points. So that this is in line with the principle of our proposal, and we believe that the current proposal can achieve complementary effect with that offense point system. Now, to take your next question, we are going to mandate the installation of 3 devices. Taxi drivers may wish to install additional devices that may help capture possible traffic accidents. Then it should not be positioned to capture the personal data of passengers, or else it will be in breach of our legislation. As for retrieval of video recording, the major causes are for the purpose of investigation of disputes, and as to whether police will be able to retrieve video recordings for the purpose of investigating another traffic accident, we will conduct consultation and hear more from the trade. About driving down costs and whether the government should step in the negotiation process, I think that after all, this proposal will help everybody in society. And I would say that at the moment, with market competition, prices are already competitive. That is why we don't specify a particular model. We want to encourage market competition. Mr. Stanley Lee, I support the proposal. I have 2 questions. After installing cameras, will there be any consequence if the black sheep of the family covers the camera or keeps the image vague? What is your plan in response? The other point is taxi owners and drivers will be able to choose from different suppliers or service providers. Giving them options is important because there are service providers that can offer cheaper systems on the mainland. As you mentioned, this system will cost several $1,000s. Will the government help invite mainland service providers to tap our market so as to drive prices down? To take the second question, this is a very valid point. The government will spell out very clearly the specifications, and after that, we will be in a better position to brief service providers what we want, and this can help lower the costs and encourage competition. Now, Mr. Lee asked another question, whether there will be any deliberate or inadvertent act that will cause malfunctioning of the cameras. Let me reassure members that these taxis will be subject to regular examination at our vehicle examination centers. And our check includes whether the camera systems are performing up to standard. And we don't rule out blitz checks in the future. No follow-up? Then Mr. Luk Chung Hong. In March this year, I asked an oral question in the council meeting. I requested that in-car cameras and dash cameras be installed on taxis to avoid disputes and non-compliances, and I thank the government for heeding my view. I have a number of questions. First, specifications. I think the government should set the bar a little bit higher. Now, we just inspected a taxi, and the majority of taxis already have cameras installed at the front, at the back, and in the compartment. Now, I think you should mandate the directions of cameras to avoid disputes. Now, the current approach for the police in handling disputes is to invite the parties to make statements, and this is really time-consuming. Is it possible to request the police to retrieve the recordings from the camera system first? And only when there is prima facie evidence should the police further invite the parties to take statements. This can help address misunderstandings and save the driver's time in going to the police station. Now, my next question is on e-payment. As I understand, there will be no surcharge on the drivers, but a 3% surcharge on consumers or passengers. This is a rather significant amount. Will this be disincentivizing passengers in using e-payment? Is there room to drive down the surcharge? My last point is this. The government is running on a tight budget, but still, I think subsidies should be provided for the smooth operation of your proposal. Another member suggested $1,000 per taxi, and that's $18 million in total, or at least half that amount. Is it possible? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Luk, for your questions. I think the first 2 points relate to law enforcement action in the future. You mentioned the direction of cameras and where these cameras should be positioned. I think we will discuss with the trade in future. But we also need to have regard to privacy concerns from passengers. Now, you asked another question, and that is whether it's possible for the police to retrieve and review the video recordings before inviting parties to make statements. Now, it has to do with the investigation process. It's not for us to tell you the answer right away. But I can imagine that this could be a concern, and that is whether the video recordings should be retrieved without authorization or consent. So that means we should follow the established investigation procedures. And I think part of that procedures entails inviting the witnesses to make statements. So I understand Mr. Luk's concern about streamlining the investigation procedures, but it should be done without compromising the integrity of the investigation.
Mr. Kisson-Yang, thank you, Chairman. I support the camera system proposal of the government. This will protect the interests of both the taxi drivers and passengers. I have a few questions. First, according to the government paper, it costs quite a lot to install the camera system. And the system has to meet the government requirements. If you simplify the requirements, it will help lower the cost. For example, you are going to require the video and audio recordings to be stored in the device for at least 30 days, and it requires a lot of memory. If the data is going to be stored in the centralized platform, why will you have to have the data included in the device for not less than 30 days? Why not make it 15 days? On the navigation system, it has to support the Beidou navigation satellite system as well as the global positioning system. Can the device only support one type of system? If you are able to lower the requirements, it will help lower the installation costs for taxi drivers. My second question concerns personal privacy. Understand that the dash camera will only record the road conditions. However, you are going to authorize taxi owners to retrieve the recordings. Will you prohibit these taxi drivers or owners from uploading these retrieved video recordings to the social media platforms? Also, the Secretary mentioned that there might be surprise inspections. However, in some cases, drivers may not be aware that the cameras are blurred or that the recordings did not work. There might be taxi drivers with ill intention. How can you ensure that the camera system will work properly? Lastly, I can, for example, use my own WeChat personal account to collect fares. Will you allow taxi drivers to do this? Secretary, on privacy concerns, the government is taking the lead on this. We are going to amend the legislations to ensure that personal privacy will be protected. The data collected will be encrypted. We have talked to the Privacy Commissioner for personal data. And the current legislation applies to the camera system proposal. We understand that we have to ensure the cost effectiveness of the camera system. If the video and audio recordings have to be uploaded immediately, it will cost a lot. That's why we ask that the recordings and data collected be saved in the storage device for a certain period of time. Mr. Edward Lau. I support this camera system proposal. I think that all taxi compartments should be installed with such devices. this proposal is long ado, so we have to catch up with the progress. The government proposal is to let taxi drivers install the camera systems themselves. Why doesn't the government install the devices for taxi drivers and then collect monthly fees from taxi drivers? This can help ensure cost effectiveness, and the devices procured may be cheaper, and you can also ensure a unified standard of these devices. For some cameras, they might not capture the faces of passengers, but some may not have the same function. So it might be better if the government can do the installation itself. Also, how are you going to ensure effective regulation? For some e-payment platforms, they do not charge handling fees. However, by the time all taxi drivers offer e-payment means, these e-payment platforms may end up increasing the handling charges because they will be able to secure revenue from taxi drivers. In cases where e-payment platforms increase handling charges, will they have to get approval from the government to do so? Currently, handling charges may be waived. However, in the future, handling fees may be charged or increased. So I think it is desirable if the government can help coordinate this. Otherwise, the government will have to come up with a regulatory regime. Secretary, I thank Mr. Lau for the questions. Currently, we have 18,000 taxis in Hong Kong. I've worked with the taxi trade for many years. It doesn't necessarily make things faster if we impose a mandatory system. We are going to provide or stipulate the requirements through legislative amendment. Taxi owners or taxi companies will be able to opt for the preferred models they want. And this won't necessarily slow things down. By the middle of next year, we will have about 3,000 taxis under the taxi fleet regimes, and all these taxis will be equipped with the camera system required, and they will provide e-payment means, and they will be the exemplary models for the trade. I asked a question about the handling charges. Well, this is about the market operation. We have to take into account the interests of taxi drivers and taxi owners. As mentioned in my opening remarks, this e-payment proposal will bring benefits to the taxi trade. We will also talk to the insurance sector. Hopefully, the insurance premium level will be lowered after the proposal is implemented. Mr. Yim Kong. Services provided by Hong Kong taxi drivers have come under criticism. With the camera system, it will ensure more effective investigation on complaints. A few days ago, someone complained to me that the taxi driver concerned did not accept RMB. The taxi driver said he did not know what RMB was, and he insisted on not accepting RMB. So I give my support to this proposal. 2 years ago, at this panel, I already called for mandatory installation or mandatory provision of e-payment by taxi drivers. I have the following questions. According to the government paper, some drivers are old. How can you ensure that they can be familiar with the e-payment proposal? Will you train up these taxi drivers? Also, for some taxi drivers, their income is not stable. For those who have applied for public rental housing, with the e-payment system installed, the government will have a clearer grasp of how much they earn monthly, and this is not favorable for them as they have to meet the income requirement to get or to be allocated public rental housing units. Do you have any measures to help these taxi drivers? Secretary, I thank Mr. Yim for the support. If you get any complaints in the future, please let us know. On the e-payment proposal, we understand that some taxi drivers are old, and they're worried that the amount of money they earn will be exposed with the installation of the e-payment system. We cannot wait any longer. We have to promote more e-payment means. For some taxi drivers who are old or aren't familiar with the different e-payment means, well, I actually don't agree. This is because a lot of the elderly taxi drivers, they are smart. The Transport Department has a role to play. If we find it necessary to roll out any training courses through the taxi trade associations or through other parties, we can offer support to those taxi drivers who are afraid of using the e-payment system. As to whether the e-payment system will affect the level of income earned by taxi drivers, I think taxi drivers, they have to make a judgment themselves. We are going to roll out such a reform, and taxi drivers will have the right to choose whether they want to stay in the trade. We won't compromise the interests of the public because of these taxi drivers. Mr. Chen Xiuhong, I would like to thank the administration. I myself, as well as the chairman of this panel, have been calling for the installation of camera systems in taxi compartments and the provision of e-payment means. This helps enhance service quality provided by the trade as well as the passengers' experience. I have a couple of questions. The taxi trade in general welcomes this proposal. However, the devils are in the details. You are going to require all taxi drivers to have the camera system installed in taxi compartments. Say one of the 3 devices does not work, then the driver will not be able to drive the taxi, and this will affect their income. If you allow the taxi driver to carry on with the work, then there won't be any evidence or data available in case there are disputes. I'm happy, on the other hand, that the government is going to engage a third party to set up, manage, and operate a centralized platform for the data collected. There is not much that the third party will have to do. It is only when problems arise that the third party will have to upload the relevant data to the centralized platform, which will then pass on to the enforcement authorities. Will the centralized platform charge a fee? According to my understanding, you won't charge a fee because this is a service provided by the government. However, how can you prevent abuse of this system? Sometimes taxi owners may have to retrieve recordings from the centralized platform to deal with matters related to insurance claims. My other question concerned about the ownership of the data collected. Will there be disputes in the future in relation to the ownership of the data collected by the camera system? You may have to consider this when you draft the legislation.
Secretary, I thank Mr. Chan Xiu-hong for the questions he's asked about the details, and these are very good questions. We'll go back and study them. Now, about the camera system, if it breaks down as soon as the engine starts, then what should happen? I think it's similar to the taxi meter. Now, if the driver ignites the engine and then finds that the taxi meter doesn't work, then this definitely affects the operation. And this is an issue that we have to overcome. Now, for the centralized platform, this will be provided by the government, and that means we need to deploy resources in a value for money manner. I believe at the teething stage, we will be coming across a lot of cases. Now, taking the Shenzhen and Macau experience in the initial stage, they also ran into different, a lot of cases. This is due to the surge of complaints as a result of the mechanism being set up. We're not going to underestimate the workload, but we believe that things will run smoothly as we go on. About the data rights, I don't know whether the commissioner will be able to give you an answer. Now, in terms of the legal position of the data and the rights concerned, we will be very careful. Our bill will spell out very clearly the liabilities and of different parties. Commissioner? On the issue of personal data privacy, the focus is on data user and whether the data are used in an appropriate manner. As mentioned, only authorized persons can retrieve data from the centralized platform, and they should come with good reasons, such as the handling of complaints and investigation of cases. So only persons authorized by the government will be data users. Now, for the onboard cameras, the data may involve personal privacy. What happens to the data stored in dash cams? That is capturing what happens outside the taxi. Right, do pay attention to this point when you draft your bill. Next, Mr. Zhao Sichong. In principle, I support this proposal, Chairman. I have some questions. As mentioned by Mr. Chan Xiu-hong, I'm concerned about the possible malfunctioning of the devices. That means the taxi won't be able to start its service. Now, for a taxi meter, it's easy to see. If the taxi meter doesn't work, then of course everyone knows. Now this system comes with cameras and the GNSS, and the taxi driver may not be aware of the malfunctioning of these devices. Have you gauged the impact? Since the driver will have to suspend his service if the devices are not working in order. My next question is about e-payment. It is true that taxi drivers prefer to take cash over other forms of e-payment for various reasons. So perhaps eventually these drivers may opt for the two forms of e-payment that are least popular in order to meet the minimum requirement in the law. Then a passenger will still not be able to pay via the popular forms of payment. Well, these are really good questions. We need to pay attention to these points in the future. Now, the first question is about the functioning of the systems and whether the driver is aware of the problem. Now, I'm a driver, so I will check whether the dash cam is functioning well. We have 18,000 taxis in Hong Kong, so we need to make sure that the system functions are properly displayed to alert the driver and the passenger in question. Mandating e-payment. We're going to mandate at least 2 forms of e-payments, including QR code ones and non-QR code ones. However, we are going to let the trade decide. It's not for the government to work out all the nitty-gritty of the laws. We cannot spell out exactly what kind of e-payment, but the point is, if the taxi driver opts for the least popular methods, it's going to impact on their business as well. Now, this is a challenging point, but I think it's important for us to explain this matter to the trade well. Mr. Frankie Yick. I have some questions. According to the paper, all taxi drivers are mandated to provide e-payment means. Now, for taxi fleets, they will be required to be equipped with e-payment means anyway. So what about the remaining drivers? So that's a point of elucidation. Next, according to the Secretary, many drivers are smart, but we still have some really aged drivers among us. So how we help them set up accounts for them to check the books. And you can also talk to the taxi associations. They would be more than happy to provide assistance. For Shenzhen Bayport, Sai Kung, I believe you've heard views that the connection signals are really bad at the remote areas. So you need to make sure the infrastructure is up to standard for the system to function properly. Now, the next point is this. According to other members, because of the exorbitant taxi insurance premiums, the business environment for the taxi trade is really bad. In fact, we've told the media that we do hope the government to provide assistance if circumstances permit when it comes to installation of the systems. Other members mentioned malfunctioning of the system. I want to tell you that for the 2 service providers already approved by the Transport Department, their systems come with an auto recognition function. At the back end, everything will be recorded. Now, for the taxi drivers' benefit, they want to have more protection as well for the purpose of getting insurance. Is it possible to, say, install another light signal, perhaps, so as to alert drivers of the malfunctioning? I don't think it will be a difficult thing to do. Another point is that we've told the government many times that cameras should be installed, but then we should not allow taxi drivers to install devices on their own, because it should be done by the government so that the data will not fall in the hands of any individual. It will be chaotic in this event. Now, according to the paper, everything is clear. Taxi owners will be able to retrieve data of the dash cams to check the driver's demeanor, whereas for the in-vehicle cameras, not even the taxi owner will be able to retrieve the data because of privacy concerns. Only authorized persons can have access. Now, Mr. Yick asked a number of questions I don't think we have time to have a full discussion of everything he said, but we'll be happy to go further after the meeting. Now, we'll be happy to work with the taxi trade so as to ensure smooth implementation. Now, for the taxi fleet regime, it's the taxi fleet operator's responsibility to install these devices. And as forms of e-payment means are already provided, we may not impose additional requirements on them. This can be considered, but the important thing is taxi owners or agents should also be engaged in the process to drive through this reform. So these two can go hand in hand. Let me reassure Mr. Yik that we're going to look at the specific details, including the responsibilities of different parties and the government's commitment in this regard. Mr. Michael Tien. Cameras and e-payment, these are the things that Roundtable has been championing for years. According to the taxi driver I came across this morning, not everything is uploaded onto the cloud. They opt for local storage. The recordings are encrypted. I was hoping that somebody from the OGO would come and explain to me the benefits of data encryption and that it would be tamper-proof, etc. But we don't have any representative from OGO here. Anyway, coming back to the taxi I took this morning, I really prefer to have this big sign here. It's really visible. This sign comes with English but not Chinese. It's for people on the outside to see. You should mandate the display of this sign in the future, and that it should come with English as well as Chinese. Now, about dash cameras. Now, the cameras may be pointing outside, but then the cameras also come with an audio function. You should make sure that audio recording inside the taxi compartment is not permitted to protect privacy. Now, this morning in the taxi, there was a camera behind me. The sound is captured perfectly. And that everything is visible. You should mandate a certain model or set out specifications. And you should make sure that the camera is installed in the compartment at the back of the compartment so as not to capture the faces of passengers. According to the driver, the data should be stored or retained not for 30 days only, but for 60 days, because in handling a complaint, there may be a very protracted communication with the police, and it would take a long time. So they would need to buy a memory card of a larger capacity. And this is coming from the taxi driver. Now, what about the device for accepting e-payments if it goes out of order, out of the blue for some unexplained reasons? Right, can I be selective? No. About the positioning of the camera, we're going to impose a requirement, but we still have time to discuss where the camera should be placed. It will be fine-tuned. About the storage period of 30 days, this is a balancing exercise. it is a mandatory requirement, but if according to the associations concerned, they'd like to have a more stringent requirement, then we'll look into that. Privacy. Now, data stored in the device will be encrypted. And in fact, we've been discussing with the OGO. And we'll continue to exchange views with LegCo members as well as other parties. This device will also be sealed, so there is multiple protection. Now, the data retention period is 30 days. Data is stored locally, not on the cloud, but after the data is uploaded to the centralized platform, then it will be stored in the government cloud. And there are stringent rules to follow. We're going to go for the most value for money option.
We can perhaps sort out the other details when the legislative amendments are ready. Mr. Dominic Lee. This proposal has attracted a lot of concerns. I myself has taken Uber taxi. Some charge the passengers based on the meter. Some charge an agreed sum of money. Almost every time, if the charge is based on the meter, the driver would make a detour. To monitor whether the driver makes a detour, I think the camera system would be effective. My questions are, what will be the penalties? Will there be heavy penalties to deter drivers from not complying with the requirements? As mentioned by some members, there are some cameras facing different angles. How would you deal with these cameras? Also, you mentioned that the data collected will be encrypted. Back in 2019, there were statistics showing that there was information leakage within the government. What will the government do to prevent such data leakage? Third question. It's about the handling charges from the e-payment platforms. Say if you use your credit card to pay for a certain thing, if you ask the consumer to pay for the 2% handling charge, it is against the rule. How come in this context you are asking the passengers to shoulder the handling charge but not the taxi drivers? Secretary. On non-compliant cases, we will come up with a penalty. When we devise the penalty system, we will draw reference from similar legislations involving personal privacy as well as recording system. We will talk to the DOJ about this. On the question about the centralized platform, how can we ensure that personal privacy will be protected? The Transport Department will engage an independent contractor to set up the centralized platform, which will meet the requirements set by the OGCIO. We will also conduct an independent audit as well as a risk impact assessment on the platform. On the point about e-payment, I understand that in the market there are available different types of e-payment means. Some e-payment platforms, they charge a handling fee from the consumer. In the future, When taxi drivers, taxi owners, or taxi companies opt for the e-payment platform they desire, they'll have to think about the level of convenience as well as the popularity of the platform among passengers. In the future, when we talk to the trade about this, we will disseminate information about the different platforms. Mr. Chen Pui-leung. According to the government paper, one of the functions of the dash camera to be installed is to facilitate the investigation and settlement of claims by insurance companies. According to Annex 1 of the paper, it sets out the major specifications of the dash camera, and you require that the dash camera to be installed to clearly capture the view in front of the vehicle. How about traffic accidents that happen behind the vehicle? Should you require that the dash camera capture clearly the view in front of the vehicle as well as behind the vehicle? Also, how are you going to ensure that the dash camera will be maintained properly after they are installed and that they will continue to function properly? Turning to a point about insurance matters. It is not enough if you are asking the data collected to be stored for just 30 days. If you want to claim or make claims due to personal injuries, you can do it within 2 years. So taxi drivers or owners should store or retain the data collected for longer than 30 days so that they can submit the relevant information if required when they handle any matters related to insurance claims. Secretary, I thank Mr. Chen for the suggestions. I think they deserve our attention. We'll talk to the trade to see how we can minimize the risks, and we'll also talk to insurance companies about these suggestions. I've also heard views these past few days about the dash cameras to be installed. Some say that the dash cameras should capture views both in front of the vehicles as well as behind the vehicles. We will study this closely. Dr. Lo Wai-kwok, I speak in support of the government's proposal. That is, all taxi compartments should be installed with the camera systems and that all taxi drivers should offer different e-payment means. All members said that they have been calling for these for a long time. And this is true. And this also shows that these proposals are long overdue. These practices have been adopted in different places in the world for a long time. So we are falling behind in this regard. I give my support to these proposals, and I hope that the drafted legislative amendments will be submitted to the Legislative Council soon. Some members of the public are concerned about privacy issues. According to the government proposal, taxi drivers will not be allowed to upload the data collected to the internet. It is only under certain circumstances that authorized persons will be able to view the relevant videos. It is not that anyone could upload the information online. Many taxis have been installed with these in-car cameras devices already. How are you going to deal with these pre-existing in-vehicle cameras? Are you going to regulate these devices? My other question is about e-payment. E-payment will provide convenience to passengers from a business perspective. So I don't see any reasons for me to object to this proposal. During COVID, there were a lot of incentives for people to, or for merchants to provide e-payment means. Even those merchants and operators working in the wet market. So I think this e-payment proposal should be implemented. Secretary, we want to adopt a result-oriented approach. We want to speed up the progress, but at the same time, we want to ensure a smooth implementation of the proposals. We want to be able to sort out all details by then. Some members raised questions about the technical details, so we'll have to work hard and speed up the progress and address all these questions one by one. Some taxi drivers already have installed a camera system in the taxi compartments. Under the current privacy ordinance, there are certain provisions about protecting personal privacy. The Privacy Commissioner has also rolled out rules and regulations about protecting personal privacy. While this proposal has not been implemented, we want to remind taxi drivers to be careful and not violate the law inadvertently. Chairman, I think that there should be camera in front capturing the view in front of the vehicle as well as behind the vehicle. All right, noted. Well, Mrs. Regina E pressed the button after I drew the line, but there is sufficient time, so I'll allow her to speak after my turn. Some members said they have been calling for the camera system proposal as well as the e-payment proposal for a long time. I think everyone in Hong Kong have been waiting for these proposals. And this is a significant enhancement measure for the taxi trade. So I do hope that the proposals will be implemented as soon as possible. Some members asked about the technical details. I'm not going to repeat those questions here. I think the public has to understand that this system is authorized by the government. Will there be signage that would allow the public to know that it is an authorized system and to prevent taxi drivers from installing devices that are not approved by the government? Some members asked whether the dash camera should capture the view in front of the vehicle or behind the vehicle. This has to do with evidence gathering. If the video capturing the view behind the vehicle would facilitate evidence gathering, of course, it would be helpful. Also, the meters installed in taxis now involve some kind of recordings or records as well. And the meters information belong to the taxi drivers. In the future, will the data collected by the camera system be owned by the taxi drivers? Also, will taxi drivers be allowed to use their own personal e-payment account to collect fares? This might offer more convenience.
3 questions. A member mentioned a sign displayed inside the taxi compartment. I think it's important for the public to know that this is a device approved and recognized by the government. Now, for the sign In fact, on the door of inside, on the door inside the compartment, there is a yellow sign stating the channel for a passenger to lodge a complaint. But I've asked my colleagues that it is an opportune time to give this sign a facelift. But I also heard what Mr. Michael Tien said, that we should improve the signage. Now, you also asked whether the in-vehicle camera should capture the face or just the back of the driver and the passenger. The purpose of installing cameras inside the taxi compartment is to gather evidence to solve disputes or handle complaints. So, as a preliminary thought, we do believe it is important to capture the face of the passenger and the driver. However, we'll keep it in view. There should be cogent reasons to tell the public why cameras will be positioned in a way to capture the face of passenger as well as the driver. Now, about the recordings in question, they are part of the business, and should the recordings should they belong to the drivers or otherwise? Well, it's the taxi owner's responsibility to provide e-payment means, and taxi drivers may also make arrangements using their own mobile phones to allow e-payments. So we will make sure that all scenarios are captured in our bill. Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, Chairman. I have a very short question about payment system. Not about taxis, but about minibuses. Can I put this question anyway? The government is going to introduce legislation for taxis, but what about minibuses? What is the government's thinking? Because, say, at the peak, at the peak tram terminus, this is a popular way for passengers, to take minibuses to the peak, and this could spark payment disputes among passengers and minibus drivers. We do have a subsidy scheme, and we understand that there is public aspiration for other forms of payment to be allowed on top of octopus cards, and we will consider different options, and if deemed suitable, we will encourage minibus drivers to install devices to accept different payment means. I'll see the Commissioner can supplement my point. We've been talking to different payment service providers. We hope that we can encourage the operators of minibus routes to install these devices, so that for tourists who don't have Hong Kong dollar cash at hand, they will be able to make use of the e-payment devices as well. We will follow up on this with Mrs. Regina Ip. Right, that wraps up the discussion of this item, and there is general support from members. So let's move on to the next item. I will invite Deputy Chair to preside over the meeting now.
而家有請有關嘅政府部門。
Let me invite the administration to come in first.
有意按鈕嘅即係發言嘅議員咧，亦都可以而家撳掣啦。
Members, if you want to ask questions, please press the button. We move on to item 3, vessel subsidy scheme. I will invite the administration to walk us through the paper. Right, thank you, Chair, members. In order to improve fleet quality and promote environmental protection as well as enhance the experience of passengers, the government announced in the Chief Executive's in the policy address the vessel subsidy scheme to encourage fleet operators to adopt greener vessels and improve their fleet. For the first phase of the VSS, some vessels have commenced operation since the beginning of the year, and they have also received positive response. Among the newly procured vessels, some of them are hybrid vessels. In order to gauge the effectiveness of hybrid vessels in plying outlying island ferry services, the government will progressively commence the trial starting from the end of December this year, so that's very soon. Meanwhile, we encourage operators to adopt multiple prongs to improve their long-term financial viability through improving farebox revenues and non-farebox revenues so as to create room to further improve the quality of service for passengers. I will now give the floor to Deputy Commissioner Ms. Ng to give you more details of the vessel subsidy scheme and other support measures. We'll be happy to take questions and comments from members. Thank you. Ms. Fong, Assistant Commissioner. Now, I will brief member on the latest progress of the vessel subsidy scheme. In 2019 policy address, the Chief Executive announced the implementation of the vessel subsidy scheme to help operators replace existing fleets and introduce greener vessels. Starting from 2021, the scheme fully subsidizes 10 ferry routes to replace entire fleets with greener vessels equipped with new facilities in 2 phases. And altogether, 44 new vessels will be procured, and there are 2 phases. They cover 6 major outlying island ferry routes, including the following routes: central to Changchao to Mui Wo, inter-islands central to Pingchao, Yongshuwan, and Sokuwan. For the first phase, 22 vessels have been procured, including 4 hybrid vessels. As for the next phase, 11 new vessels will be procured for the other routes. The government set up an interdepartmental working group to devise the details of the scheme and oversee its progress. Under the VSS, the government subsidizes operators for the cost of purchasing the vessels on a reimbursement basis. The government also enters into agreement with each operator. As the registered owner of the vessels, the operator is required to bear all the operational and legal responsibilities of the operations. And if they cease operation, the agreement requires the vessels to be transferred to the nominee of the government in order to continue the operation of the routes, and no operator shall resell the vessels without the government's consent. And as in the middle of December 2024, 12 vessels have arrived, and 9 of them have commenced service. For the 3 hybrid vessels, the trial will commence by the end of December 2024. For the remaining 10 new vessels, they will gradually arrive by the end of 2025 for full commissioning in the first quarter of 2026. The new vessels are constructed of lightweight and corrosion-resistant materials, and they are of lighter weight and higher durability. They also comply with the highest IMO Tier 3 standard to reduce the emission of nitrogen oxides. These new vessels are equipped with air conditioning and comprehensive and user-friendly facilities, including breastfeeding areas, more luggage storage spaces, and a pet area with independent ventilation, mobile phone charging facilities, and more spaces for the wheelchair-bound to park their wheelchairs, as well as accessible toilets. Now, we conducted a passenger opinion survey in September. About 1,800 passengers responded. The questions covered areas such as seat comfort, air conditioning, lighting, cleanliness, and so forth. In summary, 95% of passengers rated the new vessels as very satisfactory or satisfactory overall. The three areas they find the most satisfied with were seat comfort, access to natural light, and cleanliness. About 95% of them were very satisfied with the three areas. The new vessels had seen the most notable improvements in the area of toilets, cleanliness, and decoration. So these are the major areas that passengers have expressed satisfaction with. As mentioned, the trial for the hybrid vessels will commence by the end of December. It will last for 16 months, and it will be done in 3 phases. For the first phase or first stage, it will be conducted without passengers. It will go on for 1 month for coxswains and crew members to familiar themselves with the operation of hybrid vessels. The second stage will last for 3 months, and the vessels will be carrying passengers on supplementary sailings or normal sailings during off-peak hours. And the third stage will run for 1 year. The vessels will be carrying passengers during peak hours. We're close to completing the preparation for the launch of hybrid vessels, and we will also provide training for coxswains and crew members. In terms of the technical performance, operational performance, cost effectiveness, etc., an expert panel has been set up, and they'll be giving advice to the government. Depending on the outcome and effectiveness of the trial, the government will decide on the number of hybrid vessels to be procured in the second stage of VSS. We also have other special helping measures to assist outlying island ferry operators. As an established practice, subsidies will be provided on a reimbursement basis. The government will also allow the operators to sublet pier premises for retail and commercial purposes so as to subsidize the operation in order to earn non-fare box revenue. All right, the floor is now open. We have 7 members waiting to speak. Kenneth Lau, Chen Xiu-hong, Chen Hock-fung, Frankie Yik, Yim Kong, Chen Pui-leung, Regina Ip. We're supposed to adjourn this meeting at 12:45. Depending on the situation, I may extend the meeting by 15 minutes. I will give each member 4 minutes, questions and answers. Please make sure there is sufficient time for the government official to respond to your questions. Mr. Kenneth Lau. In 2019, the government rolled out the vessel subsidy scheme to assist outlying island ferry operators to replace existing fleets and introduce greener vessels. I think this is beneficial for Hong Kong in the sense of carbon emission reduction. As I understand, some new vessels have been commissioned since the beginning of the year. The response is positive. Now, my question is this. In this year's policy address, there are measures to promote green hydrogen energy. With the installation of the infrastructure, we will be moving on the next stage of development. Meanwhile, I understand in other places they are developing green hydrogen fueled vessels as well. In the mainland, last October in Hubei, the first hydrogen-fueled vessel had its maiden voyage, and the first passenger-carrying commercial hydrogen-fueled vessel also completed the first trip in July in America. I want to know whether similar vessels will be introduced in Hong Kong. Yes. Earlier, the government promulgated a plan on green fuel bunkering. The government sets out a strategy and an action plan for green marine fuel supply. It's something new for Hong Kong and for the rest of the world. That includes hydrogen, liquefied natural gas, as well as methanol. And these are new technologies. We will closely monitor the development of these new technologies and see how and when these technologies will be introduced in Hong Kong. But we're not relaxing our efforts. Under the vessel subsidy scheme, we will commence a trial on hybrid vessels. So we are contributing towards meeting the carbon emission reduction goals.
Mr. Chen Xiu-hong, thank you, Chairman. Using greener vessels is the trend. I support the government's proposal to assist outlying island ferry operators to use greener vessels, and these new vessels comply with the highest International Maritime Organization Tier 3 standard. This is in line with the global trend, and this will also offer a better experience for passengers. I'm happy to see that over 95% of the passengers are satisfied or very satisfied with the new vessels. So I see that the new vessels have helped improve passengers' experience. I thank the government for rolling out these measures. I have two questions, Chairman. Outlying island ferry services are run by the private sector, but they get the subsidies from the government. And for 10 outlying ferry routes, they get the support from the government to procure greener vessels. Paragraph 11 to 15 of the government paper mention that special helping measures from the government include non-fare box revenue. In the coming 3 to 5 years, do you think that the ferry operators will be able to sustain their businesses on their own and that they will no longer need the financial support from the government? My other question concerns the hybrid vessels. This is going to be the first time for hybrid vessels to run in Hong Kong in providing outlying ferry services. The trial will be launched in phases and they will last for 16 months. The operation of hybrid vessels is different from that for traditional or conventional vessels. Are there enough crew members that have received training or are qualified to manage and maintain these hybrid vessels? Is there enough manpower in this regard? Two questions, Commissioner. On some support measures from the government, member is right that outlying ferry services are the only transportation mode for the local residents. Under the vessel subsidy scheme, we support the operators to replace their fleets. As mentioned, part of the helping measures is to give reimbursement for the operators to ensure their sustainable financial position. Without these helping measures, local residents will be subject to huge pressure on high fares. We have made an assessment on whether these helping measures are able to support the ferry operators. We see that with the helping measures, their financial positions have improved in the past 2-3 years. So these helping measures are indeed effective for the operators. The operating costs are subject to inflation. So it's not that the ferry operators won't have to increase fares with the helping measures. It's just that these measures help ease the financial burden of the operators. On the point about hybrid vessels, it's true that these are newer vessels, and it is the first time that these hybrid vessels operate outlying ferry services in Hong Kong. On the maintenance and operation of these vessels, it might be different compared to that of conventional vessels. That's why we mentioned that there is going to be a trial program. For the first 3 months, we require the crew members to be familiar with the operation of the hybrid vessels. Part of the training is to ensure that crew members know how to operate these hybrid vessels. The second phase of the trial will entail trial of these hybrid vessels on supplementary sailings or normal sailings during off-peak hours. And in the last phase, we will conduct the trial during regular passenger services. In the meantime, we will collect data on the performance of these hybrid vessels. We will analyze the data to see if hybrid vessels perform well in providing outlying ferry services in Hong Kong, and this will help us decide the next step forward. Thank you. Mr. Chan Hock Fong. I support the government scheme in offering support to ferry operators. Outlying island residents have no choice but take the ferries. However, we keep seeing fare increases by ferry operators. However, I understand that the operating costs are high for these ferry operators. For all these outlying ferry routes, it is only the one that goes to Cheung Chau that sees revenue or profit. For the other routes, they're basically losing money. I hope the procurement of new vessels will help with the operation of the ferry operators. Some members of the sector have asked me a couple of questions. They said that the new vessels are a bit larger than the original vessels. According to the law, they need to deploy more manpower to operate these vessels. For example, they need 4 crew members instead of 3 to operate the new vessels. So they are facing more pressure because they are facing higher manpower cost. And the level of fuel required is higher for these new vessels as well. You are subsidizing these ferry operators to procure new vessels, but these ferry operators are also at the same time facing higher operating costs. So are the new vessels actually helping the ferry operators? At this moment, I don't see significant improvement in terms of their financial sustainability. My other question concerns the piers. I've talked to some ferry companies. They want to use the piers for different types of operation, but they'll have to go through the town planning board and other government departments in order to do that. They also have to meet the fire safety requirements. So because of all these, they aren't able to achieve what they want. The transport department does want to help the ferry operators, but the other government departments and bureaus seem to be an obstacle for these ferry operators. Can you tell the other government departments about the challenges faced by the ferry operators so that the relevant restrictions can be relaxed? Also, I have written to the administration about this during COVID. Some of the ferries are allowed to sell snacks or light refreshment on the ferries. I think you need to give these ferry operators more support in this regard. Deputy Secretary, on the point about new vessels, there are quite a number of differences between the new vessels as well as the conventional vessels. For example, the facilities have been upgraded, and in terms of the carrying capacity, the new vessels will be able to carry more passengers because they are larger in size. The new vessels have to meet the requirements imposed by the Marine Department, and so more manpower have to be deployed. But with larger vessels, they can carry more passengers. We are studying the utilization rate of these new vessels. As these new vessels gradually commence operation, we will talk to the ferry operators to learn about the situation. We have different measures to help the outlying island ferry operators. On the use of piers, the government has been encouraging ferry operators to expand their non-fare box income, apart from generating fare box revenue. So we do a lot to support the operators in this regard. Each pier faces a different situation. For some operators, they want to sublet the pier premises for different purposes. For other operators, they might want to organize activities in vacant pier spaces. So different ferry operators have different proposals and ideas. We welcome any proposals and ideas. After we receive their feedback, we will help coordinate with other government departments to facilitate their applications. Say for some ferry operators, they want to run eating premises at the piers, and they will have to meet the fire safety requirements. We cannot do away with these requirements. All we can do is to help speed up the application or approval process. We have seen some successful cases. Say for some ferry operators, they want to run eating premises, and they will have to meet the relevant electricity or power supply requirements. And we did manage to help them sort out all these details. Member mentioned about licensing requirements or the need to get a food license by the ferry operators. We are looking at the relevant terms and conditions. We have followed up on Mr. Chan's letter, and we have explained to the relevant ferry operators in relation to the requirements to apply for a food factory license, and the FEHD will also try to speed up the approval process. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you, Chairman. I thank Mr. Chan Hock Fung for reflecting the views of the sector to the administration. With new vessels, the costs also become higher. I understand that you are going to carry out some form of balancing test for these new vessels, and you'll need more manpower to do this. It's been hard to recruit crew members. And this is where the problem lies. The outlying island ferry operators have been struggling. Without government subsidy, they won't be able to sustain their businesses. So will there be subsidies or extra allowances for these ferry operators? Turning to the special helping measures, these measures will now cover 13 outlying island ferry routes instead of 10. However, currently the Kaito services aren't covered by these special helping measures. These Kaito service operators also face a lot of challenges in terms of their operation. Will the government consider including the Kaito services into the special helping measures? Otherwise, these Kaito operators will not be able to run their business.
Yes. I understand the members' concern about the trial of hybrid vessels, especially at the stage when they don't carry passengers. As I mentioned, hybrid vessels is something new to Hong Kong. It takes a longer time to test them out. Under the vessel subsidy scheme, the operating expenses will be subsidized in the form of reimbursement. Let me turn to another point. The objective of the vessel subsidy scheme is to assist operators of outlying island ferry routes. But the major principle is to adopt a market mechanism. We don't often subsidize public transport service operators. However, in the situation regarding ferry services for outlying island residents, the only option is for them to take ferries in order to go to work or to school, or at least there aren't many feasible options. So a fare hike will have a major impact on the local residents, and that is the background of the vessel subsidy scheme, to provide assistance to outlying island ferry operators providing essential services for the residents. So we need to be careful about what routes to be included in the scheme. Now, the member mentioned Kaito services, and we need to look at the major principles. For routes that only offer supplementary or weekend sailings, I'm afraid that they won't be eligible for the subsidy. And operators receiving our subsidies are required to provide information relating to their operations to the government. Now, for Kaito services, they enjoy autonomy in terms of fare levels, ferry schedules, and the routes, etc. And if they are able to meet our criteria, we don't rule out including them in the subsidy. I'm sorry, your time is up. You need to wait for another round, Mr. Yim Kong. We have many outlying islands in Hong Kong, but the resident population on these islands are dwindling, and that accounts for lack of ridership for these ferry routes. Very often, a large ferry carries only a handful of passengers. So like Mr. Frankie Yik said, these operators have run into various operational problems. At the same time, some outlying islands are popular tourist spots on weekends, and for routes that operate on weekends to these islands, they need assistance to enhance capacity. Has the government conducted a study in relation to the patronage of the 13 ferry routes on weekends, the government should consider the actual patronage. For some ferry routes, they should go for smaller vessels, smaller ferries. Like I said, this can help address the issue of having few passengers on a large ferry, and this can help optimize the use of resources. Different ferry routes can join a pool and that they can help each other out so as to address the capacity issue on weekends. And if we set up a pool, they can help save maintenance costs. Yes, thank you, Mr. Yim, for the questions. For vessels procured under the vessel subsidy scheme, they come with different sizes. And as Mr. Yim Kong has rightly put it, some routes require larger vessels because of the high patronage. Some routes, however, require only smaller vessels. So for the vessels procured in the first phase, they come with different sizes as well. We need to test their performance in different scenarios. So we will also liaise with the operators on the criteria to be adopted for procurement. As for routes rationalization, I'll give the floor to the Transport Department. Now, the member asked whether it's possible to put in place a loan arrangement for vessels to be deployed to other routes. Now, some operators run 3 routes, and among these 3 routes, they can deploy the vessels in the 3 fleets. Mr. Champollion. The government spent $5.788 billion to subsidize ferry operators to procure 44 new vessels. I want to know how much the subsidy, or how big a portion the subsidies amount to the total cost. Why? Well, if it constitutes a major portion, then why doesn't the government become the vessel owner instead? Because there are restrictions. If the operator ceases operation, the operator cannot resell the vessels without government consent anyway. The majority of ferry routes are unable to make a profit, but there are routes that will be able to make a profit since the government has put in place various local tourism schemes. If it's possible for some of these routes to make money in the future, will the government put in place a profit apportionment mechanism or some form of agreement so that part of the profits can be plowed back to the public coffers? Yes. Thank you, member, for the questions. For vessels procured under the scheme, the government provides a full subsidy to the procurement of vessels, and that accounts for the $5.788 billion. Now, the member also asked why the government isn't the vessel owner. We need to make sure that it's a good deal for the government as well. So, according to our presentation just now, we explained some safeguards for the government. For example, no resale without government consent, and that the vessel should be passed back to the government if the operator ceases to provide services. Meanwhile, the vessel owners will will be responsible for the maintenance, repair, and management of the vessels. So they are responsible for the overheads in their day-to-day business, and that if they cease operation, they will have to return the vessels to the government. So these are the safeguards. Let me turn to another question. Profit sharing. The VSS aside, the purpose of the special helping measures is to alleviate the financial burden on operators. At the moment, they are facing operational pressure. Now, if they no longer face this pressure and if they're able to make a profit, is it possible for the money to go back to the public coffers? We have this arrangement, in fact. For profits exceeding 6%, according to the agreement, they are required to share the profit in some way or another with the passengers. Well, this scenario hasn't emerged, but we do have the mechanism in place. My question is, in fact, why the government isn't the vessel owner? What is the reason behind? Because you've introduced some restrictions anyway. The underlying principle for public transport services in Hong Kong is to engage private operators to provide public transport services. The government doesn't own any fleet of in the provision of public transport services. Under this principle, the operators are required to manage and maintain and pay for the costs of such for their fleet. The crux of the matter is, as I said, since the government funds the procurement of vessels, there are provisions in place to safeguard the interests of the government. Next, Mr. Michael Look. Thank you, Chairman. I'm reading from the background brief of the prepared by the Legislative Council Secretariat. In 2019, the government proposed the replacement of 44 vessels, and 6 of them are hybrid vessels. However, from the administration paper today, I see that only 4 of the new vessels are hybrid vessels. Why are there fewer hybrid vessels? Is it because of a change in the demand? Apart from outlying island ferry routes, has the government considered expanding the VSS and special helping measures to Kaito services and the in-harbor routes, especially the route plying the geopark? Because this is essential to promoting the concept of tourism is everywhere. Can the government give us information about the cost estimate of replacement of the fleet after procuring the hybrid vessels? And is there information on cost savings on fuel and the operations in general? Yes. Well, Mr. Michael Look has a good eye. He's noticed a change in the fleet mix. The original plan is to procure 6 hybrid vessels in the first stage, and that a trial would commence for outlying island ferry routes. However, at the detailed design stage, when we set technical requirements, we discussed with the service providers, and we also sought advice from the advice panel set up by the government. They looked at the relevant data and the feasibility of adopting these vessels. According to their analysis, in the first stage, we have procured only 4 hybrid vessels for the trial. We need to collect data first. We need to consider the points raised by Mr. Michael Look, for example, whether the vessels are effective in cutting carbon emission and whether they are value for money. After all, these are new technologies. These are longer routes, so we need to consider whether the hybrid vessels will perform up to our standards and whether they are cost effective. So we need to collect data for the first stage in order to chart the way forward. Now, you also asked another question as to whether the VSS and the special helping measures will be expanded to cover other routes. As I explained, the public transport policy of the government is to rely on market operation. So we engage private operators, and very rarely will the government provide direct subsidy for any public transport service. But what is unique about outlying island ferry services is that there aren't many transport options for island residents. So the ferry service may be their only option. Another member mentioned this problem of low patronage, and this is the major cause of the operational difficulties. Without government intervention, these operators may need to introduce substantial fare hikes to sustain their business, and that is why, considering all the factors, we've rolled out the scheme to help the operators. As for in-harbor routes, there are many commuting options. They are not particularly essential to any group in the population. But it doesn't mean that the government is a bystander. We understand that public transport fares account for major costs in the day-to-day living of our citizens. And that is why we provide waiver of fees for vessel licenses, and we also provide subsidies to operators for the pier improvement works and the operation of the pier premises on a reimbursement basis.
Deputy Secretary said for people living on the outlying islands, they don't have many transportation options. But for ferries going to, for example, the geopark, there aren't many transportation options either. Well, the subsidy scheme is part of the tourism policy of the government. We want to attract tourists to come to Hong Kong. If we can make the ferry services cheaper, they might be more willing to spend money on catering as well as other areas. Deputy Secretary, tourists mostly come for leisure or recreational purposes, and they often visit the outlying islands on weekends. And Kaito service operators can adjust their frequency of services as well as the fare prices based on the need. Under our existing policy, we offer financial support to operators that offer necessary transportation services for local residents. All right, thank you. We've wrapped up this item. Last item, any other business? This meeting is the last regular meeting this year. I thank members as well as the administration for their support and the active participation in the work of the panel. Meeting concluded. Thank you.